Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 138 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. As noted last week, we are in the midst of a series of episodes in which we are talking about how we may best leverage technology in the field of corrections. Now, last week we spoke with Jonathan Lay, who told us all about the amazing software he and his team have developed at Make Time Count Today. Please check out that installment to learn more about a platform which can revolutionize the way probation and parole officers function in their role as brokers of service. And this week, we are going to be talking with an individual who is going to share with us her expertise around the topics of smart prisons and artificial intelligence. Pia Puolakka has been working for the Prison and Probation Service of Finland since 2012. She started as a prison psychologist, but in 2018, Pia was appointed as the project manager of their Smart Prison project. In 2020, she started as the project manager of their RISE AI project that's developing artificial intelligence applications for offender management systems. By education, Pia is a forensic psychologist. She has also done further studies in artificial intelligence and is a board member of the EuroPris ICT expert group. Please enjoy my conversation with Pia Puolakka, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show. We are joined today by Pia Puolakka, joining us all the way from Helsinki in Finland. Why don't we start off, Pia, by you just telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, perhaps highlighting some of your educational and vocational milestones, and then we'll do a deeper dive into this fascinating topic around smart prisons and artificial intelligence.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. And my name is Pia Puolakka, and I've been working for the Finnish Prison and Probation Service since 2012. And my background is in forensic psychology, so I started as a prison psychologist about 12 years ago, And since 2017, I've been working more on the national and administrative level in the Prison and Probation Service. And first, when I started here in the administration, I worked as a senior specialist, and I was responsible for rehabilitative services in prisons, like psychological work and other rehabilitative work. And then 2018 started the so-called Smart Prison project. And that's still my current post. So I'm developing digital services for prisons, and I'm leading the implementation of the Smart Prison system in Finnish prisons. And then we also have new artificial intelligence project related to our offender management system. And then we had organizational change on September 1st this year, so I'm also a team leader for a new team in the operative management unit of Prison and Probation Service. I also work as a psychotherapist, so that's my background too. And then I'm involved in the EuroPris ICT expert group. That's my professional background.
So much going on right now. And again, I want to get to some of these really intriguing topics as far as I'm concerned. Why don't we just skip right to the chase and talk about your work with smart prisons? Give us sort of a broad overview of that. And then I've got some follow-up questions because, again, I'm really intrigued by this. So what does that look like right now, your work with smart prisons in Finland?
So at the moment, it looks like that we have successfully implemented the first smart prison in Finland, and that happened in 2021. We had a new women's prison in Hämeenlinna, about 100 kilometers from the capital Helsinki, where I'm situated. And smart prison means that every inmate has a cell device in their cell for personal use. So basically, it's a laptop in the cell with a smart system installed. And inmates can use this system for inside prison communication, management of daily affairs, and then to a limited extent, they can use it for communicating to outside prison. And they can also use restricted internet connection and inmate email system. And for example, use video calls with relatives, and video calls are also used a lot by our partnering organizations when they arrange all kind of rehabilitative services for inmates. So basically, this is the system we implemented, the so-called smart prison system. And about 2 weeks ago, we actually implemented the second smart prison in Finland. So we have now 2 smart prisons, and we try to implement the system to all our closed units. We have about 15 closed prisons in Finland. So we still have a lot to do, of course. And I think it's important to understand that this is not only a digital or technical project. So it has a lot to do with a larger prison concept, smart prison concept, which to us means that we want the prison to be a learning environment for a life without crime. So we try to provide inmates with services from inside prison and from outside prison to help with their needs and to help with the process of reintegrating back to the society. And it's also about, it's also a question of equality, equal access to services. It's a question of digital inclusion and societal inclusion in general. So these questions have been very important when we have developed the smart prison system.
So many things I'd like to unpack there, Pia. You mentioned, you mentioned, for example, the streamlined communication, I guess, for lack of a better term. So not just those internal communications, which I know here in the United States, we have a term. We say that the inmate, the resident, will write a kite to their caseworker. So it sounds like that has gotten a lot more efficient. But more to the point, you're giving, as you alluded to, the residents access to the community. I know, again, we've got some experience here bringing the internet into our correctional facilities, but it's always been very guarded, very protected. How do you sort of strike that balance, I guess, between, as you said, the ultimate goal of reintegration with those security concerns about unfettered access to the internet?
First of all, the system was security audited several times before we took it into use. So we've used a lot of technical expertise also from outside prison and probation service to secure that everything is functioning properly. And of course, technically, it's possible to monitor what is happening in the system, log informations if it says anything to listeners who are not into ICT, but we can use the information from the device. We can collect certain information from there. And we can also monitor real time, if necessary, the video calls. And also the inmate email system is monitored by staff in a certain way. So Finnish legislation gives us some rights to secure and monitor the system. But then again, it's also in our legislation that inmates have the right to internet services, video calls, and even email. Of course, we can also use our management of permissions is also very important part of this. So every inmate always has to apply for permission to use internet, video calls, and email. So at that point, we evaluate how much rights we can kind of give to the specific inmate. So if we want to be more restrictive, we can do it. But on the other hand, if there's no specific reason why to restrict the connections, we can allow it. And then, of course, we have the same kind of tools for monitoring and security as with any other activities that we have inside prison.
As you were speaking previously, and again, sort of sharing the vision of the ultimate goal of smart prisons, which is, of course, resident reintegration, it reminded me a little bit, Pia, of some of the work and research I've done with the so-called Norwegian prison approach, where they're emphasizing more of what they call dynamic security rather than static security. Did you channel some of that philosophy, it sounds like, into this smart prison approach?
Yes, it sounds familiar, because an important part of dynamic security is that staff and inmates interact actively with each other. So staff and especially case managers are aware what is going on in the inmate's life, what kind of targets there are for the rehabilitation of the specific inmate. They are interested in how he's doing. They do a lot of motivational work with the inmate, and they orient and help to get things to work with the inmate. So it's very important that to understand that also the staff responsible for security is not only responsible for the security, but in a way they are also social workers, rehabilitative workers, even though their title is a prison officer. So I think this is the idea of dynamic security.
I love it, Pia. It sounds like it's not just a matter of bringing in the technology, but also that philosophy of a much more relationship and humanistic approach to what you're doing. Talk a little bit about your work with artificial intelligence, which is of course related, but again also a fascinating topic, and I'm sure something that other corrections officials are curious about implementing themselves, and or even wondering where that might apply in a correctional setting.
Yes, we started a new artificial intelligence project a couple of years ago when we were designing our new offender management system. And the offender management system was implemented this year in May. And we are testing and developing the system still. But in the end part of the development, we will include this AI component in the system. And this AI component is supposed to help with the management of offenders' needs and risks and the services that we recommend to the offender based on his background information, risk factors, etc. So using the language of artificial intelligence, it means that we are building kind of a recommender system inside our offender management system. Yes, this is, to be short, this is the idea. So just to give a concrete example, let's say we have an offender who in whose case is about that he's, for example, unemployed, he lacks basic education, he has substance abuse problem, all this important background information we can turn into knowledge of what this offender needs during his prison time. And based on that, the AI part can look for suitable services and also in which units these services are provided. So somebody told me it's a little bit like a hotel booking system that you are looking for something, and then the AI, based on your needs and likings, recommends you that in this place you would have these and these services, so you should maybe be placed in that particular unit. And this is supposed to work as a tool for the so-called senior coordinators that are responsible for assessment and placement of our inmates. So in Finland, every inmate goes first into the so-called assessment unit to be interviewed and assessed before the inmate is placed in a certain unit. And the senior coordinators, of course, they have knowledge about criminological, psychological factors, and they have expertise, but these experts are now getting also a tool to help with their own expert analysis.
So talk maybe more about that assessment unit, Pia. I've got questions. You talked about your offender management system, which again, I assume most prison professionals can relate to. When you talked about utilization of risk assessment, are those the, let's say, traditional criminogenic factors that a practitioner who is familiar with the risk need responsivity framework might be familiar with? Again, I know you mentioned unemployment or substance abuse. Okay, so those type of variables are factored into the equation as well. So again, maybe describe sort of the day in the life of somebody working in this assessment unit and what sort of the data coming in and what their goal is. You mentioned placement, going out, because it sounds just like a fascinating approach to me.
Yes, you are right. We use a lot the R&R model. Also, it's the basis of the AI component that it can help with this kind of analysis. That is basically the current major theory that we are still using in the criminal sanctions. So the ones responsible for the assessment, they usually have their educational background in social sciences, criminology, psychology, or something similar. And yes, it's our purpose that every inmate gets some kind of an assessment and a written plan for their sentence time, where the senior coordinator lists the most important steps and targets that the inmate that should be taken into consideration during the inmate's prison time. So, for example, the senior coordinator can recommend that a specific inmate must go to an anger management course or see a psychologist or go to substance abuse rehabilitation ward or continue his basic education or high school education during prison time. So this is the work of a senior coordinator responsible for the assessment. And then the senior coordinator also is part of the decision-making process of into which unit inmates are placed, because we have different levels of prisons. They have different security levels. Some prisons are specialized in high-risk offenders or offenders with specific needs. So part of the process is to analyze this too, that where is the best place for this inmate.
Maybe talk a little bit more about the services then. You mentioned the coordinator will help divert those inmates to the proper services within prison, and you touched on education and substance abuse. Are there services there for example, cognitive behavioral interventions or some of those other needs that we might see in a traditional risk needs responsivity assessment?
Yes, we have a lot of program work in Finland. So basically, most of the program work is based on the cognitive behavioral models of changing behavior, changing your thinking, changing criminal thinking, changing aggressive behavior. Also nowadays, also programs that use Good Lives model in their framework. And we have special programs also for violent offenders or the ones that have a sexual offense. So these specific programs, yeah.
I was about to ask you, Pia, about looking at any of the emerging desistance models and factoring that in. And then lo and behold, you mentioned the Good Lives model. So I guess you beat me to my question. You're looking at some of those, again, more strength-based or desistance-related approaches as well, it sounds like.
Yes, these two. So not only risk-based, but strength-based analyses. And yes, the desistance model for me means most that the process of desisting from crime is a long process and includes many stages, so to say. So it starts from motivating the offender and going through the phase where you are not really sure yet what you want to do before little by little you desist more and more from your previous lifestyle.
100%. 100%. That's what I always tell folks as well. It's a process. Individuals are on a trajectory, and it's not a black and white overnight change process. I was going to ask you as well then, so it sounds like you've got a great roadmap for individuals entering the prison, starting with assessment and then getting into placement within the prison. Do these services and this philosophy extend then beyond the prison release? What does that look like when an inmate is approaching release back into the community?
You mean, do we use a lot of services from outside prison while in the release phase?
Yes, or do you assist then with placing that inmate in the community, or again, assisting with that reintegration back into the community as far as using those same artificial intelligence approaches and assessment approaches to extend that continuum of care beyond the prison into the community after release?
Yes. So in the beginning of sentence, we call it the sentence plan when we do the assessment and written document for everyone. And then in the end, it's called a release plan. So there's a written case scenario at that point too. And for the most high-risk offenders, we also have a process of reassessing risk. So to find out whether the risk level has actually decreased. And that's with the highest risk offenders, it's an important part of the release process and whether you can be released actually also. So there's an important assessment phase at that point. And then one of the most important ideologies that we have is that there should be a service continuum during the prison time. So actually many inmates already have some service processes going on in the civil life before they enter the prison, and we shouldn't cut these ties, these processes. And then it also should be important that we continue the process that has started in prison to civil life. One of the best examples is substance abuse rehabilitation. So everybody knows that the risk of reoffending and the risk of relapse is highest within the first 2 days of being released from prison. So it's very important that the continuum starts immediately so that you have some place to go and stay, and you have services ready for you when you are released, so that you are not released, so to say, alone and without any support. So housing support, social support, rehabilitative support is important that it's planned carefully. And the higher your risk is, the more important it is that there's something you can hold on to. so that you don't have to go back to your previous life, so that you don't have to look for help from there, where you're coming from.
Pia, I follow you on LinkedIn, and I know you're involved in several projects. Talk about the work you've been doing with the Council of Europe, again, related to artificial intelligence.
Yes, the Council of Europe invited me to join their working group for drafting recommendations for the use of AI in corrections. And Council of Europe is at the moment working a lot around the topic of AI. So there's also an ongoing process of giving ethical guidelines and recommendations of the use of AI in general, and in legal questions, and also now considering corrections. And this is how the Council of Europe actually works, that the Council has several working groups, and then the working groups present their work to the Council, and then the recommendations are delivered to all countries part of the Council of Europe area. So me and two of my colleagues, one from Sweden and one from Spain, we are working together, and there's still one more year to go. So the recommendations should be ready by the end of 2023. And basically, the most important part of the recommendations is to highlight the ethical questions related to the use of AI, and how the ethical use of AI should work in corrections.
You brought up an interesting topic when you touched on how the ethics of this may look. I have a colleague by the name of Jason Marinas, who actually is a member of the American Probation and Paroles Association's technology committee, and he was fascinated, Pia, when I told him that you were going to be a guest on my show. So he actually provided me some really good follow-up questions here, and you brought up ethics, and that was one of his questions. He was asking me to ask you, how do you account for or address automation bias based on bad or potentially limited information?
So first of all, those that develop the systems like this, systems for corrections, these people need to be experts in the substance too, not only the technical side. So they have to have enough knowledge and expertise in criminology, psychology, our major theories, what we listed in this interview to be able to design algorithm that actually works for our target group offenders. That's really important. So there should be enough expertise, and yes, of course, also enough data. So the more there is data, the more accurate the AI can become. And then before you use the data, you have to use the human expertise to analyze whether the data is actually accurate or not. So not just use any data that comes in, but a human is needed in the process of designing AI systems. A human who has enough expertise, because what we are actually doing is that we are turning our own expertise, our own logic and decision-making process into automated form. So AI is and algorithms are only as good as the human designing the system. And then I think that while using these AI systems, we should monitor them, check them on a regular basis, and not kind of let them run on their own, just producing results after results, but actually check that whether the results that we get are accurate. For example, with offenders, if we use a system, like I told you about our offender management system, if we are using the AI component there, does it become somehow evident to us that we are making better decisions or better placements for our inmates or not. So where do we see the positive result? Or if we don't see it, maybe we are doing something wrong. Yeah, and Finland, I think the major challenge is that because our inmate population is quite small, so there's a question of whether we have enough data. And of course, some of the data is the kind that we can be sure it's correct. But we also have a lot of data that is just gathered from interviews, so it is still subjective information, dependent on what the inmates want to tell us. So there's always, also in the human process, there's always limited data and even inaccurate data. So the challenges are same still as in the human decision-making process.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that expression before, Pia. Garbage in, garbage out. Sort of like you said, it's only designed based on the human algorithm and the data going in as well. I'm sure you've considered this question, which Jason also asked me to pose. How does legal liability work with artificial intelligence and smart prisons?
As I told you, in Finland, we are lucky that we already have a legislation considering the so-called digital rights of inmates. And the legislation was done before we started to implement the systems. And in an ideal situation, I think there should be first legal basis to be able to do what, for example, we have done in the Smart Prison project. Regarding AI, I know that many countries might have a little bit different legislation considering AI. Some countries yet don't have any regulations at the moment. And then in the European Union area, there are some regulations that are not only national but international, or at least inside Europe, international. So of course we have to follow these regulations. In Finland, what is prohibited is to use AI as a kind of profiling in those cases where the profiling would or might lead to discriminative decisions. And I'm sure examples of these kind of risks can be seen somewhere where AI have been used. But in Finland, it's important that if we use AI to profile or orient citizens into certain direction, we have to be sure that we are not discriminating or causing harm in this way. And the legal liability always relies on humans. So automated decision making is prohibited. AI can be used as a decision making tool, but automated decision making is something that cannot be done. So that's how the responsibility of decisions is always on a human.
I think when other individuals, when we talk about technology and the use of technology, we think about it sort of replacing the human workforce. What effect has job automation had on your physical workforce and staffing in your prisons, if at all?
I think we are not yet there that we would fully use all the possibilities that AI can bring. But if we think about automation in itself, I hope and I think that, for example, in the security technique of prisons, it can bring a lot of benefits. So the idea is that it should make staff's job easier and smoother and more accurate, and also ease staff workflows. And I think these kind of benefits could be already seen if we want to see them. Then, of course, one risk that regards AI in general, not only corrections, is the idea that it could somehow replace humans in certain tasks. But I think that in the near future, if this happens, it can only be the so-called routine tasks. that can be automated to that extent. So there's still a lot of work that cannot be done by an automated system. And I'm sure it's easy to understand if you are working with complex questions, doing work with humans and with humans that are in a serious way mentally their mental health is not good. They have various serious problems. I think it's easy to understand that with this kind of population, you cannot replace, for example, the rehabilitative work with robots or something like that. So there's a lot of work that needs human interaction still. And AI works then only as a tool.
Speaking of human interaction, if a listener out there is maybe either a student who wants to get into the field of corrections, or maybe they're already in corrections, but they're just starting their career and are fascinated by this, what guidance would you give them, Pia, if they wanted to get more involved in this type of work, either as a resource or a mindset? What would you advise to those folks who say, I want to follow in Pia's footsteps?
I think, of course, first, enough educational background and also working experience is needed. And so that you can, it's important first to develop yourself into an expert. And then it's very important to stay on track what happens in the technological development. I think in corrections, we have traditionally been a little bit lacking behind. So many organizations like schools or hospitals have provided digital services to their clients much earlier than we've done in corrections. Many correctional facilities don't use these kind of systems at all with inmates. So we should think that we want to modernize the corrections to the level that the rest of the society is already following or has developed. And of course, you need to be brave, to have the courage to take on new projects, and you cannot do this work alone. You need a good team. You need a lot of expertise that you don't have yourself. And of course, there's already quite a lot of literature, articles on the use of technology in corrections too. But traditionally, I think correctional research and literature has concentrated on different topics. So there's a lot of material on correctional psychology, all these theories and desistance, but not so much on the technological side. So I think this is still something quite new, and maybe the models and ideas and new initiatives come from outside corrections too at this point. So keep your eyes open.
Exactly.
I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. Pia, look into your crystal ball. I'm just wondering what the future holds. If I have you back on the show in a year or two, what updates do you think you might be sharing with the audience, or even new frontiers or dreams that you're chasing?
I hope that after a couple of years, I would be ready to tell some preliminary results of our AI project. So how it's helping our clients, how we have been able to use it, how we have been able to use Finland's national artificial intelligence program that is also implemented a little bit at the same time as our system. So I'm also looking for connection to the outside society, that we are collaborating with the national AI program here in Finland. And I hope I can tell you that we have new smart prisons, if not yet 15, maybe more than 2. And then I hope that I would be able to do some research myself too. I've been working as a practitioner for a long time, but I would like to be involved maybe in more academic research about this topic. And I hope I could tell that the impact of what we are doing in Finland would have extended to other countries, because I've gotten a lot of contacts from other countries that are saying that they are interested to follow this path. I've been consulted many times, and I'm very happy that I've been able to give something to others outside of Finland, to other prison and probation services in Europe, but also from outside Europe. So I'm really grateful for this collaboration, and I hope it continues and brings something new in other countries too.
And I hope your appearance today on the program will, to your point, help spread that word and inspire others in other countries to lean into the technology as much as you and your team have done over there in Finland. Pia Puolakka, thank you so much for joining us on the Criminologist podcast today. If you have any resources you would like to share with the audience, we can talk after the interview, and I could embed those web links or PDFs or whatever right in the description of this episode if again, you have other resources or things you'd like to share with the audience. Thank you so much for joining us, Pia. I'm glad we finally connected.
Thank you so much. It was a very nice interview, very interesting.
Take care, Pia. We'll talk soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Bye.
A big Criminologist podcast. Thank you to Pia Puolakka, joining us all the way from Helsinki in Finland. Pia came through as promised and provided us with a slew of resources for those of you who were fascinated and intrigued by Pia's talks around smart prisons and artificial intelligence. Within the description of this episode, I have embedded several web links reflecting several publications which have highlighted the work of Pia and her team, ranging from articles in Justice Trends to Penal Reform International and several other publications talking all about the great work, again, that Pia and her team have done along the lines of prison digitalization, smart prisons, and artificial intelligence. I encourage you all to check those out. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. We are going to keep the technology train moving. Next week, going to be talking to Simon Bonk, joining us from Canada to talk all about his work with Teleo. Again, keeping that technology train moving. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added to those feeds all the time. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter. You can follow us at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, or Pia Puolakka on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is now available. Visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Look for the tab entitled Shop. Get all sorts of information on how you can secure your criminologist coffee mug, refrigerator magnet, or pen. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Yes, you're right. We use a lot the R&R model. Also, it's the basis of the AI component that it can help with this kind of analysis. That is basically the current major theory that we are still using in the criminal sanctions.
The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.